day, first session of AICT AQI sponsored online 1 week short-term training program phase 2 on recent trends in energy management and audit. Topic for this morning session is green audit for colleges and universities and energy conservation case study. It is my privilege to introduce our today's resource person, Mr. Ravindra Datar, sir. He is BTech from Indian Institute of Technology, Mumbai. After passing out in 1983, he worked in Asian Paints Limited and Humphrey and Glasgow Consultant Private Limited before starting his company in 1990. He has been in the field of over 30 years and carried out 1500 energy audits and conservation studies. He is certified as well as accredited energy auditor by Bureau of Energy Efficiency. He is also a lead auditor for ISO 50001 2011 Energy Management System. He published over 75 articles and papers on conservation of energy in national and international journal and periodically. He has conducted over 200 training programs on conservation of energy for industries, educational institutes, and other. I welcome you, sir, and thank you for joining us with today. I request you to enlighten us with your words of wisdom. Over to you, Ravindra, sir.
Yeah, thanks a lot and good morning to everyone.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, basically today's topic is green audit for colleges and universities. Now this has been a NAC requirement as well. So this is a topic of interest almost for everyone, and let's try to get into details of that. I may add that here that we have done more than 30 audits for various colleges and institutes and have first-hand information on what activities are carried out under green audit and for the colleges. So primarily the coverage include energy and energy conservation. That's a major area because that's one of the major source of green gas emission of the gases. Second is renewable energy. That basically is we are trying to shift from electrical energy to renewable energy so that overall carbon footprint can be reduced. Third aspect, also a very important one, is water and water conservation. There are some norms which we'll discuss over a period of 2 hours on how much should be the water consumption, what all can be done to optimize the consumption of water, how it can be recycled or reused. So that will be another aspect of the presentation. Then waste management, because waste, if it is not managed properly, it leads to substantial pollution as well as other hazards. So this will, again, we'll see in details. Environmental management, this is not very, if you see, it is more relevant to industries because colleges as such, the emissions or the pollution is not much, but still we will have certain points in this area. Then the green initiatives, what activities have been undertaken by the colleges towards green energy or green planet, sustainable development. This can be internal also as well as external, like we are doing something at a college level, maybe competitions, maybe some other activities, maybe reusing the waste, or we can do, there are activities which are on a public or social level, so both the things we will see. Then last point is infrastructure and safety. What is the infrastructure available and what are the safety measures or precautions we are taking in the college? So energy basically, as you can see, the first aspect is energy bill and cost, although it is not directly relevant to energy saving, because if we reduce the energy bill or cost, it doesn't mean we are saving in terms of emission or in terms of kVH, but that is always at the heart of our point, because whatever we are doing, it should also have a commercial bearing. So we will see the details in about the energy bill, what are the components of the cost and how that cost can be reduced. There are multiple things, when we see There's the categories, then the billing type, cycles, then power factor. So all this we'll see in slightly more detail. Second aspect is energy efficient gadgets. Whatever gadgets we are buying, whether the purchases are correct, whatever probably we have done, we may not be able to change that because replacing the gadgets becomes slightly more capital intensive and the paybacks are not attractive. But when we are doing new purchases, whether we are buying energy efficiency gadgets or whether we are considering the energy cost as a part of the selection process, that aspect we will see. Then come the selection and deployment of gadgets. Whether we are selecting the gadgets appropriately, basically from the point of view of sizing, capacity, and location, all other things that we will see, because that also has a great impact on the effectiveness of the consumption. Now I'll give a small example here. We were doing audit for a office, which had a width of 5 meters. And one side was wall and another side they had a window or fencing. So they had all their split ACs installed on the one end of the wall. So across the 5 meter of length, there was absolutely no air conditioning. So the one side, the wall where the AC was installed, those people were always feeling cold, and the people who were far away from the AC, they were feeling warm, because the temperature gradient, when we measure, it was almost about 3 degrees centigrade. So here the temperature, one side the temperature was 22, another side it was 25 or something like that. So basically where the gadget is installed also becomes an important thing. Then operation and maintenance, that is another aspect which probably gets neglected in colleges because they don't have dedicated maintenance team, unlike industries where they have people who will have O&M practices, and they will have SOPs, everything. So some of that can be adopted even by us to ensure that the equipment are running efficiently and they are serviced and maintained in a proper way. The last aspect is automation and control. There are a lot of automation and control systems are possible with which energy consumption can be controlled. Second part of this also will be whether we have a proper monitoring and metering for the consumption. Although if you see colleges, the overall energy consumption may not be very big, and we may not go for a dedicated SCADA or such kind of system. But with the help of basic metering and regular analysis of data, we can see where we are heading to and how the air consumption can be reduced. The second part will be renewable energy. So renewable energy basically is now what is commonly possible for colleges, especially the smaller one, is solar rooftop, solar photovoltaic. So we'll see that in bit detail. Solar thermal also is possible, but hardly any hot water application in colleges, but that also is an area which can be explored. Then we have a biogas from food waste, agro waste based power generation or other systems, and micro wind turbines. Then we'll see water and water conservation. Depending on the source of water, we need to have a proper purification system. We also need to check drinking water quality and arrangements. So we'll see that in some details. There are a lot of gadgets available which consume lesser water. Now, I'll tell you, there are some faucets available which consume just 2% of the regular water for hand washing. They're available on Amazon, costing about 1,500 rupees or something. But it is with a mist. It has a kind of special nozzle which generate mist, and the entire hand will get wet with a very small quantity of water. You can also see the videos; those are available. I can also share that to individual if somebody is interested. The next part is automation and control. Similarly, as energy, we can do with some sensors, maybe for flushing, maybe for tank filling and other things. Then reuse or recycle of water. There is another area which can be looked at. The last one is the rainwater harvesting. There are multiple possibilities available with which we can harvest rainwater and contribute to overall environmental improvement. Environmental management aspect will have air quality and ventilation. Basically, this is for closed space as well as open area like indoor, outdoor. The primary parameters are temperature, RH, CO2, VOC, NOx, SOx, SPM. The second aspect is illumination and lighting, mainly indoor, but also for roads and pathways, especially if it is a big campus. Smaller institute who are not operating during nighttime, it doesn't make that much of sense. But now many colleges have evening classes also, so that is area where we need to look at illumination and lighting. Now here I would just like to add one thing, that in general, Indians are comfortable with lower illumination level. If you see international standards and norms, even Indian standards, we talk about considerably higher lux level than what we actually ourselves are comfortable with. So norms are more mainly on standards. We are comfortable with lesser lux level, and probably that's how it has been maintained also. Third aspect is now noise and sound level. Then general, neat and cleanliness, greenery and water bodies. Again, this is more relevant if you're talking of a campus. If it's a single building, standalone building, this may not be as much relevant. Then the environmental policies followed in campus by the college, like whether you have a restricted entry for vehicles in some of the area, you don't use plastic, ban plastic in campus, or such kind of thing. Then whether there are in campus, if the campus is big, then maybe you can have cycles, only cycles are allowed in specific areas, maybe electrical vehicles are allowed, such kind of thing. Or maybe electrical vehicles are provided by the university or college, so that the staff or people do not use their own vehicles or rickshaws. The other green initiatives what have been taken is whether you have a paperless communication, then whether we have got any awards or rewards, because there are now a lot of competitions, or there are a lot of areas where this kind of thing also can be seen. Then what are the environmental promotion activities undertaken by the college in-house and beyond, like for the public or society? Then comes basically waste management. Now waste management is not much of a gaseous waste. Waste can be of three forms, either liquid, solid, or gaseous. So colleges normally will not have much of a gaseous emission because there's not much of a production going on. Apart from small labs, or maybe some cases you have a pilot scale activity, maybe a small quantity of waste, gaseous waste effluent may be generated, but more or less it will be solid or water. So there are 4 R's. We'll see that slightly in detail: review, reduce, reuse, and recycle. Then segregation and wastewater treatment. It is very essential to segregate the waste. That is, we'll see that in detail. But basically, if you segregate at source, it becomes very easy to treat. If it is mixed and then goes to a larger volume, then it becomes a nuisance, like what we have in Mumbai. Now, Deonar dumpyard has tons and tons of mixed waste. It is very difficult to do any sorting and treatment at that level. Of course, there are some plants available. There are solid waste management plants available. We also have done audit for them, but it becomes very, very tedious. You have to have a proper treatment plant, and even then there will be some methane generation which will again harm the environment, because methane is one of the largest greenhouse gas compared to carbon dioxide. So that also is a problem. So segregation and mitigation at generation or source is the best way of treating the effluent. So that way we will see for water as well as we'll see for the solids. And the last is infrastructure and safety, that is in-campus movement, entrances, like this is on an overall basis, whether from the safety point of view, entrances are there accessible, then they're wide enough for emergency evacuation. Similarly for staircases, pathways, then landscaping, that is, this is basically a mix of everything. Firefighting systems, this on safety side. Then whether we have any major safety manual, operating procedures, do you carry out mock drills, then building condition, general security and fencing. So these all will be covered in the course of our presentation. And this is basically a part of the green audit report, what is prepared and what is actually expected by NAC. So we'll start with the energy conservation and energy. As I said, basically we'll see the bills and cost first, because that's where ultimately we are all interested. Now, when I mean energy, mainly because we are consuming electrical energy, we'll focus more on electrical, because fuel is really very small, maybe for canteen or something. And for that, we have to only have a trade-off between cost and convenience. If you go for LPG, it's most convenient, most expensive. If you go for furnace oil or coal, it is not convenient, but it is cheaper. So that is where we have to have a trade-off of cost and convenience. And you can add efficiency also to that, because LPG may have better efficiency compared to coal-fired system. But now there are efficient chulas available, which will have quite a good efficiency on a solid fuel system also. So mainly fuel is cost and convenience, but if you see the electricity, we see the more details. First is a category. The state electricity board has different kind of categories, and the cost of energy depends on the category. Now, the basic categories are residential, that is for household and house use. Commercial is basically for offices, then maybe that kind of activity, maybe that. Then you have industrial, where the manufacturing activity goes on. So that comes under industrial. Then there are also different categories, some depending on the state. Each state has different rules. So we cannot have a generalized statement here. You can see for your own state what are the category available, and all this information is available on the website. Either we go to the Electricity Regulatory Commissioner of your state. That is, for Maharashtra is MERC. For any Gujarat it may GERC. So each state will have its own Electricity Regulatory Commission. You can go to their site. From there, the tariff rate will be available. Categories will be available. So all the details will be available. You can also get it from the website of your electricity supplier. Now, suppose we have Adani Power in Mumbai, Tata Power in Mumbai. So they, on their website, they will provide you all the kind of information about costing. Now, this has been made mandatory by government. So there is absolutely, the availability is there. Only thing we have to download and analyze ourselves. So this will have a category, and the category and other thing keep changing. So if you have seen it 1 year, doesn't mean it is valid. Every year it changes. And if you have any reservation, you can make a representation to Electricity Regulatory Commission and it will be heard. So it is not that your electricity supplier can decide the cost and then charge accordingly. The costs are decided by the regulatory commissioning, and in which everyone has a say. To what extent they will listen is different thing, but you can make a representation and based on that decisions are taken. So in Maharashtra earlier, all the colleges were under commercial category. Afterwards, they made a separate category for educational institutes and hospitals or something like that. And the difference between the two was almost 1.5 rupees. That is, you consider almost about 18 to 20% of the bill. So just by changing the category from commercial to educational institute, the colleges could save 15 to 20% of their total bill. So you can imagine the impact the category can have on your energy bill. So you need to check regularly and see that if there's a different category, then it should be availed. All colleges can come together and make a representation also, because it's an educational institute. So it should be not be a commercially, it should not be in a commercial activity. So that is the first thing. You should see what is the category. It is written in your bill. It is available on the website. You have to see whether the college category is correct or not. Then the second thing is the type of connection, high tension connection, multiple low tension connection. Low tension basically is 430 volt supply. The step down is done by the electricity supplier company, and you don't have a transformer. You get a 430 three-phase supply, which can be used, directly used for your appliances. The high tension is more than 430. It starts at 11,000, 22,000, depending on the area and the load. So you need to have your own transformer. So 11 kV will be stepped down to 430 volts, and then it will be used as a three-phase, single-phase load, as the case may be. The ST normally rates are less than LT rates. So the advantage is ST rates are less compared to LT, but of course you need to invest in infrastructure like transformer, space, other things. So depending on the load, there is option of going for HT or multiple LTs. So you have to do that cost benefit analysis. This is again applicable more for a larger institute or having a central AC or really big, 500 kilowatt or 600 kilowatt kind of load. They may be considered. Third aspect is billing. The billing is kVAH and kWh. As most of you are from engineering background, so I don't have to explain the difference between kVH and kWh. kWh is actual consumed, kVH apparent power, and the ratio of kWh and kVH is a power factor. So if the power factor is less, because what we are actually consuming is kWh, but many states, including Maharashtra now, they are gone to kVAH billing. So your consumption is built on kVAH, but actually your requirement is kWh. So if you can maintain a very little gap between kVAH and kWh, your bill can get reduced. So for that, we need to continuously monitor and maintain power factor at mains, because each motor will have its own power factor, AC will have its own power factor, your lamps will have its own power factor. So that point we cannot do any correction. The correction can be done at the mains, so that power factor gets corrected and kWh and kVH reading, the difference is minimal. So with that, it is possible to reduce the bill. We have seen reduction up to 3 to 5% due to improvement in the power factor. Third part, we need to see whether we are paying any penalty. Because what happens, you have now of course, if there is a kVH billing, power factor penalty may not be there, but there is a penalty for maximum demand. There are different kind of penalties. So in the electricity bill, there will be a separate column, whether if you exceed the demand, there will be penalty. If you power factor is low, there can be penalty. So you have to see whether you are paying any penalty or not, and that has to be remedied. The next aspect is time of the day charges. When you have a bigger connection, it may be that the cost of energy is not same across the day. During the peak time, that what we call is a 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. in the evening, where everybody is going home, starting the lights, the light load goes up, street lights are on, the consumption is maximum, so is the cost. So if you see the cost at 6 to 10 p.m. is quite high compared to cost at night. At 10 p.m. most of the people are now gone to sleep. The lights are load is less. Many of the industries are now closed because not everyone operates in three shifts. So the total requirement of energy comes down. So government has the cost of energy also is reduced. So depending on the state, there can be multiple zones. In Maharashtra, there are 4 zones, A, B, C, D. Gujarat may be having 3, other state may have it. And at that zone, the tariff is differential. It is not the same. If you see in Maharashtra, there is almost 2 rupees difference between the peak power rate and non-peak power rate. 2 rupees is almost about 18% of the bill or 20% of the bill. So we have to see whether we are coming under that category, and we have to see whether the TOD tariff we can take any advantages of. Mostly it is difficult for colleges, but still there could be some activities, some non-critical activities, some non-essential activities can be shifted to the non-peak hours. Then there are some incentives on power factor. If the billing on kWh, then there is an incentive for power factor. If the billing is on kVAh, there is no incentive because power factor gets automatically covered in a kVH billing. Then there is an incentive for load factor. It will not be applicable for colleges because load factor is the ratio of actual consumption versus maximum demand. Now college doesn't operate 24/7, so the load factor will be less and probably will not get the incentive. But power factor, yes, if the billing is kWh, you should look for a power factor incentive and see whether you can get some incentive on that. Then there is some incentive for immediate payment, prompt payment incentive, which is quite attractive because it's only question of paying 15 days in advance and you get a good incentive for that. So you can consider that also. So for this, you should regularly visit the sites of Electricity Regulatory Commission or electricity supplier and be abreast about the cost structure. Fuel, as I said, is only convenience and cost. There's not much we can do about it because colleges do not consume that much of fuel. Second aspect is the purchasing of the energy efficient gadgets. Now, as you may be aware, BEE or Bureau of Energy Efficiency is a nodal government body to promote energy conservation activities. So basically, all the activities are clubbed, and energy conservation activities are clubbed and coming under ambit of BEE. This is as per the EC Act 2002 or something. And they also want to monitor reduction in energy intensity because that is what the basic target we are committed. And probably you must have read that India is the only country in the world who is meeting the commitment made at the France convention. So thanks to the efforts of all of us and including Bureau of Energy efforts, we have been doing good work and BEE is quite competent and doing a lot of good activities. One of the activity is standard and labeling. What they are doing is all the major consumer items, they are trying to label the consumption, how much is the energy consumed by those gadgets. Because normally when we go to the market or when we want to buy something, we just go to the shop, see the product, maybe apart from whatever looks or other thing, aesthetics, what we want, we see the cost and based on the cost, we make purchase. We don't really care to see how much it is going to cost us when we run it in the house. And mind you, I'll tell you, the cost of running is much more than cost of first purchase. I have a slide also, next slide, I'll explain it to you. But that is the concept of life cycle cost. How much energy it is going to consume over the period of its life. Now, if you do that analysis, it becomes apparent that even if you have to pay slightly more in the beginning, it becomes worthwhile because the gadget is consuming less energy and it is paying you in that form. But that is generally the manufacturer doesn't provide that data because he doesn't want to tell that his gadget is less efficient. But under standard and labeling program, it has become mandatory for the manufacturer to put a label on his gadget, saying that this is going to be the annual consumption based on average hours, whatever BEE has said. And depending on the consumption, Bureau of Energy Efficiency had made star labeling. It is from star 1 to star 5. Star 5 is the best, most efficient gadget. Again, there is a range. Even in star 5, there are two gadgets. One may be consuming less than other, but at least it has a 5-star rating. And 4-star is slightly less, 5-star. So each one they are given the specification that if the energy consumption and other parameters are in this range, the star will be 1 rating and so on and so forth. So that is something has happened for some gadgets, and it is essential that we see those consumption values and star rating while making the purchases, and also consider life cycle cost when making a purchases. So with the standard and labeling, when we go to the buy, when we go and buy AC or fridge or maybe even a lamp, we know that this is going to be my running cost and this is the first cost, and accordingly we can make a decision. Now that is why the objective, that you take a call considering you should have the information available, and that is why it is a very good practice adopted by Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Of course, it is done by other countries also. They have Energy Star rating program in US and other countries, but we have a star rating in BEE. So as I was saying, we should do the life cycle cost analysis. This is very essential. When we are buying any machine or any gadget, because buying a slightly efficient equipment is not going to cost that much high, compared to what saving it is doing. I'll just give an example. Now we just take a case of split AC, 1 star versus 5 star. We are operating 10 hours a day and 250 days a year. This is a figure. You can change the values accordingly. The saving will change. Useful life of the machine, you consider the 10 years. So we'll say that for 10 hours a day, it will run 250 days in a year. For 10 years, they'll give a service. Now, whatever maintenance cost or the servicing cost is there, it is going to be same for both machines, whether it's a 1 star or 5 star, it is not going to cost you additionally to service the machine. So I not consider those costs. Power cost is 8 rupees. It will keep on changing, but in future, again, the next year it may be more, but let us consider 8 rupees as a standard cost over a period of 10 years. So the cost of machine is 20,000 1 star and cost of machine is 25,000 for a 5 star. Now the difference is 5,000 rupees. Now when we are buying, we may not really bother, so if we don't get a star rating label, we may not bother. Why we should buy a 25,000 rupees machine? We should buy a simple one. It is costing less. It looks equally good. It is from the same company. And mind you, these star gadgets are made by same company. It is not that only Daikin will make 5 star and Voltas will make 4 star. Not like that. Voltas will make 4 star, 1 star, 2 star, 3 star. Daikin also will do that because they want to cater to all the market. There are people who want to buy a cheaper one. There are people who want to buy efficient one. So each manufacturer will have you a complete range of product. Incidentally, BEE also has made an app. So you can download it on your mobile and also see all the values on your mobile while making a purchase. Anyway, typically here the 1 TR is the rated capacity. And as you know, energy and TR and kilowatt, all are energy terms. So they are interconvertible. So 1 TR will mean about 3.51 kilowatt of cooling. Now, energy efficiency ratio for a 1 star machine is 3.2 as per the BEE, and for 5 star it is 4.5. So for giving same cooling, one machine will consume 1.1 kilowatt while another will consume 0.78 kilowatt. Now that is where the saving. Now you have paid 5,000 rupees more, but you are getting the improvement of 3.2 kilowatt here. So you are saving directly on this. So if you consider the total lifetime power consumption in terms of kWh, it will come to 27,451 it will consume, whereas 5 star will consume just 19,520. You can see the difference over a period of 10 years of time. So lifetime energy cost here is 2.2 lakhs, here it is 1.56 lakhs. So although you have paid 5,000 rupees more, what you are getting here is much more than that over a period of 10 years. And what is the lifetime energy cost of a machine? 11 times of the first cost, 20,000 rupees and 2.2 lakhs. So it is 11 times you are basically paying for the energy. So you should always consider the operating cost while making a purchase. That is what is the idea of this. Here it is 25 times, 6 times, because it's a more efficient machine and costing more. So what is the saving? 7,900 units, 63,000 rupees. You have paid 5,000 rupees more. So you have recovered your money in the first year. So it will be a wise decision to buy a 5 star air conditioner if you have such kind of usage. If you're going to use only for 2 hours a day, or maybe only into a peak summer of 15-20 days, correspondingly these values will change and may not become attractive. So the idea is to do this analysis when we are making a big purchase, energy intensive purchase. I'll add here that this has been made mandatory in as per ISO 50001. That's the energy management standard. So any organization which wants to adopt energy management standard ISO 50001, they have to do such kind of analysis when they are making a purchase, or even when they are making a design change. Suppose you are making some piping modification in the plant. What should be the pipe size? What kind of layout it should be? Now, when we are doing that, it is always essential to see the impact, energy impact, and do life cycle analysis so that learned decision can be taken. You can still buy a one-star machine after doing all this, but then it is your informed choice that knowingly you are done that this, okay, I know I'm going to spend so much more, but I don't know whether I'm going to use 10 hours for 10 years or not. So I want to buy, still want to buy one star. You can take a decision, but this is with knowledge. It is not a decision by ignorant. It is a decision by a learned person. So this is basically the, that's why BW star rating one need to see when we are buying anything. Now this is available for many of the products, but I have listed down which are relevant to us. These are mandatory. When you are buying a lamp, refrigerators, air conditioners, geysers, TV sets, it has become mandatory that the star rating has to be done. The product cannot be sold without star rating. Even if it has one star, it is okay, because one star also has a minimum value. So your machine is not efficient. If the efficiency is below a lower threshold value, it is not sold in the market. It is not available in the market. So that is what it is. So these gadgets cannot be sold without the label. And you see now LED, like people say, okay, we are going to buy LED. Now there's a lot of companies are there, the locals are there, Chinese are there, Philips is there. Now, how to differentiate? So when we are buying a lamp, the differentiation can be based on the how much, what is the efficiency of the lamp, what is the star rating, what is the lumen output per watt. It's called efficacy, lumen per watt. So that is all available now with the label. So when we are buying LED, we know, okay, Philips is giving almost 25% more light. So okay, if it is a 7 watt normal bulb, I can manage with 5 watt of Philips. So what is the cost difference? How much is it? So that thing can be worked out. Similarly for refrigerators, air conditioners, geysers, and voluntary gadgets, it is for ceiling fans, laptop, notebooks, office equipment like printers and scanners, etc. Then centralized chillers, microwave, deep freezers. Now, for this, it is voluntary, but there are some gadgets available with the star rating. We can always compare and demand for this information. And if the consumer demands, definitely more and more companies will be forced to get into star rating mode, despite not being mandatory. So ceiling fan is one area of interest which I would like to take slightly in detail, because original ceiling fans, the consumption is 60 to 80 watts, whereas then energy efficient now 5-star ceiling fans, what they have BW has come up is about 50 watt or something in that range. But there are now ceiling fans available with BLDC motors, brushless DC motor or electronically commuted DC motor, which consume 28 watt or 24 watt. So there's a substantial improvement in energy consumption by replacement of the ceiling fan. If you go for BLDC fan, they cost about 1,000 rupees more, typically 2,500, 2,600. There are two companies making it, Superfan and Armstrong, and they are available on Amazon also. So when we are buying a ceiling fan, it is always better to go for a BLDC motor fan, because the efficiency is quite good. They consume 28, better than 5-star rated ceiling fans of BW. and they had the remote control, so remote speed monitoring. Then it's again programmable facilities are there. So that is another area where we need to see that lamps, because most of the people are going for LED as such. So we only need to see the star level part. But ceiling fan, we should also see whether it is a BLDC fan, because they are much more efficient compared to other fans. The next is, as I said, selection and deployment of gadgets. So it should be appropriate or commensurate with the actual requirement, because there is a tendency, some people have a tendency of undersizing the machine, air conditioning especially. Say, okay, the area is so much, we can manage with smaller machine. But smaller machine, then it takes more time to cool. Then you tend to set at the lower temperature. So effectively, it leads to higher consumption. If it is grossly oversized, it will keep on operating very frequently, again leading to problem. So it should more or less meet with the requirement. It should not be grossly oversized or undersized. Then, as I said, location should be correct. It should not be located to have a deviations across the room. It happens for lights also. We have seen many places, including few colleges. There are substantial number of lamps close to the window. So when the window are anyway open, so you have a natural light available during the daytime for the most of the period, excluding the monsoon. So those lamps are unnecessarily burning. The other problem, what happens is there is a common switch. So at times it becomes difficult to switch off the lamps which are close to the natural light availability. So there again, we can think of some options, or maybe initial wiring can be done that way, so that those lamps can be separately switched off. There are some remote gadgets also available. Now we cannot change the wiring, but there are some gadgets available with which we can switch on and off the lamps. Earlier there were pull cord switches. You can have a small switch on the tube light with a string. So you pull the string, the lamp will be on and off. Of course, that doesn't look very nice. And college student being very they might keep doing it. But there are remote switches available, which can be done with remotely. You can switch on and switch off the lamps. So that kind of thing can be considered at a retrospective thing. The location and height also is important. If it is at very high elevation, the lamps are located at wrong height, or even the AC at wrong place, can also lead to higher consumption. The usage should be judicious. And the system losses, this is more relevant for air conditioning, because I don't think more colleges have that kind of air conditioning load. But the losses in the system should be minimized. Like there should not be air increase, there should not be, door should not be open, there shouldn't be crack in the windows and all that kind of thing. The next is operation and maintenance of the equipment. So one is the usage, the actual running of the equipment, and the operating practices, switching on, switching off, maintaining the temperature, other parameters. Like AC also, you'll see people have a tendency of maintaining 20 degrees, whereas human being normally is comfortable at 25 degrees. So any unnecessary lower temperature can lead to energy losses. Many times we have seen that the lamps are on even when nobody is there, or even when the daylight is available. So that kind of thing also need to be improved upon. That comes as the operating practices. Then maintenance and servicing. So the gadgets should be regularly maintained and serviced. Otherwise, the performance drops down. Even the lamps, if there is a dust deposition, the total effective lighting level falls down. So is the case with air conditioning and other gadgets. So maintenance and servicing is essential. And after maintenance and servicing, we also should need to check the performance, because normally what happens, this has happened in even IITs, the maintenance contract is given to L1, and L1, as you know, has correspondingly lesser quality of services. So after the servicing, also the performance does not improve that much. If you clean the indoor unit, outdoor unit, or if you clean the system, correspondingly there should be an improvement in the performance, which was not observed. So there has to be some monitoring from our side on the performance, and it is not very difficult. We can have a small sets of parameters which can be checked, and college has a lot of resources. There are a lot of enthusiastic students. Some of them can be made to volunteer to get involved into all this, and monitoring can become a regular activity. Then automation and control, as I said, this is basically not have very great potential, but it is part of the whole NAG activity. One is the metering and monitoring. We can have some additional meters if the college or university has a larger area. If it is a small college, maybe it will not be worth having multiple meters. But otherwise, there can be a section-wise meters to see how much is the consumption. But more important thing is it should be monitored. How much is consuming and how much should it be, like compared to yesterday or compared to last year, same day, similar period. What is the consumption now? Is there any variation? Is there any increase? Because any deterioration in equipment or any system will lead to energy consumption, which ultimately will be seen from the billing. So this is why some metering and regular monitoring of the consumption is essential thing. And it really can help in a big way. Now, I'll just give a small example. We did audit for one of the corporate house. The entire building was there with a centralized air conditioning system. And the normal office timings were morning 9 o'clock to evening 6 o'clock. So as a part of the audit, we had energy meter installed on the main incoming, and we carried out a 24-hour logging of the power consumption. And what we observed that although 6 o'clock is a normal time, the consumption does not drop until about 9 o'clock. 6 to 9, almost 3 hours. The consumption is almost 10% of time. The consumption is still higher. So we could not understand why the consumption is higher even when the normal office times are over. Because if there are small number of people are sitting somewhere or other, we are not going to have similar consumption. Because there has to be a dip. If instead of 800 people or 1,000 people, if you have only 100 or 20, 25 or 100 people sitting, correspondingly, there has to be some drop in the consumption, which was not happening. So we try to find out from the operations people that why the consumption is not dropping, what are the machines which are running even when the office time is over. So he said, sir, the main centralized AC is still on till 9 o'clock. Then we asked him why it is on. Then he said, no, all the top management people, they sit till 9 o'clock. There are some small meetings taking place. And how can we make them uncomfortable? So to keep the maybe top few person, maybe about 15, 20 top brass, the entire the system was in operation and continuously consuming energy. So when we talk to the same guys, because we were anyway dealing with the top guys. So when we talk to them saying that this is what you are consuming, now see, this is the situation. For 10 P or 10, 15 P senior person, the entire equipment is running till 9 o'clock. So immediately he said, please stop that. We just run the fans. We are comfortable. There's no problem. And they stopped that 200, 250 TR chiller immediately next day. And the consumption drastically started falling down from 6 o'clock onward. Then after some days, they went for a small separate air conditioner for that meeting area, so that whatever that area is occupied till 9 o'clock will have a separate air conditioning to avoid the inconvenience and also to stop the main fans. Otherwise, although the chiller was not working, some chill water circulation pump and centralized AHU fans were running. So to stop that, they had a small AC fitted for that particular area. So that overall consumption will drastically come down. So this is basically why I'm saying that metering is essential, because once we meter, analyze, we know that the gaps, where are the gaps, and correspondingly take corrective action. Second is benchmarking. Benchmarking is comparing our consumption against similar size colleges or similar size institutes. Now, this is a very good idea. Now, I may add here that Bureau of Energy Efficiency has also started making norms for building, because building is now one of the major consumers of energy. Of course, colleges still do not have air conditioning, centralized AC, but if you see offices, most of them have a centralized AC. Call centers or data centers all have centralized AC. Offices have centralized AC. Their consumptions are higher. So Bureau of Energy Efficiency has come for a star rating programs for buildings. So depending on your consumption, watt per meter square, they take the total operating period, total bill, total area, then watt per meter square per, that will be EPI, Energy Performance Index. So that is how it is computed. And then based on that, there is a star rating given. The building also can be 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, depending on the consumption. They have norms for hotels. 5-star hotels, again, they have benchmarking done. So this should be the kWh per meter square consumption for a 5-star hotel. Hospitals, they have some benchmarking for depending on the capacity, number of beds. So similarly, even colleges, BW might come up, but you can also think of having a benchmarking value that this is per meter square of area. This is what our consumption. You might as well do it for a per person also. That is also possible. That per student or per student or per meter square, whichever becomes comfortable. With that, benchmarking can be done so that you can compare your performance against a similar level or similar capacity institute, and then see the improvements are possible. In automation, we have again some can go for occupancy sensors. They are again expensive. Costs are coming down, but still they're expensive. But air conditioning space, this can be done. Lighting, it becomes slightly costly, but it is possible. Like at least for the less occupied or sparingly occupied areas, occupancy sensor can be provided. Then there are environmental sensors also can be thought of: temperature, RH, CO2, VOC, SPM. Process sensors is also not that much valid, but you can have, if you have a overhead tanks, then you can have the pumping based on the water level, because otherwise there are cases where overflow of water from the tank also is leading to substantial water losses. We are seeing a college where 15% of water was lost due to overflow. Because somebody had to climb up and see the level, then come down and switch off the pump. So the watchman will not go up and down so many times. What he used to do is he used to just ensure that there is an overflow, and once the overflow is there, then he used to switch off the pump. Now the actual overflow and time he notices, also there was a gap, and correspondingly there was a substantial loss of water due to overflow. So such kind of small low cost sensors also can be thought of for one. There can be a timer based sensors, especially if you have a street lights or such kind of thing. There are astronomical timers available. So even the actual time will be set depending on the sunset and sunrise time of that area. So month wise, location wise, there will be a adjustment, so that summer it will be off for longer time, winter will be off for smaller time, depending on the sunset and sunrise time. The next is renewable energy. As I said, the most thing what we are seeing is solar photovoltaic. Solar photovoltaic, actually, you may be aware, but now solar photovoltaic, when it started, it was a standalone system where we have a solar photovoltaic panel generating electricity, and that electricity was supplied to dedicated equipment. So that started creating a problem because the demand and supply will never match. So the power generated by photovoltaic and the requirement of those gadgets were always in mismatch, leading to less saving, less generation. Because you cannot have a situation where there is no power available. So if the solar photovoltaic is 5 kilowatt, people used to connect 4 kilowatt of load to that. So that, okay, even if it is slightly less, it's okay, but it should run continuously. Then the concept of grid synchronization has come. So here rooftop solar photovoltaic is basically synchronized with your LT panel. So whatever is generated by the solar photovoltaic, that will be taken and the balance requirement will come from the grid. So there is no worry about losses from the solar photovoltaic. You are able to use 100% of the solar photovoltaic generation. But here again, there was second problem is the colleges are not working on Sundays, holidays, or maybe summer vacation. Then what happened during that period? So then the concept of net metering is come. In net metering is basically like, you have a flexi deposit with the bank. When you need money, it will come from the flexi deposit. When you put back money in the bank, it will go to the flexi deposit. So you get an interest rate of the flexi deposit for the period for which the money is there. Rest of time, you can also use the money. So you don't have to break the FD, go to the bank and all that. So that is the concept. Same concept is here in net metering. So whatever is generation, if you are not able to consume it, it will go to your electricity supplier. Meaning it will go to the grid. It will be consumed by grid. Somebody else somewhere it will consume. And whenever you are consuming, you are getting from the grid. And whatever is the net consumption, whatever you consume and whatever you are given to the grid, based on that, there will be a billing. So this is the best system, and now it is available in almost all the state. Electricity board tries to put some problematic, because they don't want it, but it is available now. With the initial teething problem, you can go for a net metering, and that is the best thing, because whenever you are consuming, it is like a deposit that if you are not consuming, it is there with the grid, and you can take it whenever you want. So now, if you are going for a solar photovoltaic, you should always go for solar photovoltaic grid synchronized with net metering. If your college is large, you have a big campus, you can think of large capacity solar photovoltaic on a ground-based system with wheeling. But it is not becoming very attractive because the total costing has come down. But rooftop solar is quite attractive. Then I have a solar thermal. Solar thermal primarily is, for hot water generation. There are 2-3 types of solar systems available. One is a medium temperature, about 60-70 degree water, which can be used for bathing application, washing applications, and all that. There are solar cookers available for direct cooking, and there are different kind of solar cookers available. Now, it can be for rice, it can be even for roti making. There are Schaeffler discs available where you can concentrate that ray inside kitchen on a steel block, heat it to almost 200 degrees or 250 degrees, and have a roti made or even puri made, frying done on that. So that is also available, but they are not very viable. But simple cookers are viable. They can be thought of if you have that kind of application. Then there are high temperature water temperatures up to 110 degree water is also available. So it can be added to your for rice or any other thing if the college is making, because normally smaller college will not have such kind of requirement, but for a large campus it can be thought of. Then solar based steam systems are also available. They are there at Shirdi, Mount Abu. Somebody is interested, they can also see that. But they are more of a, not very much for colleges. It is for some people where the money is available or donations are available. So for colleges, it is basically solar photovoltaic is quite a attractive thing. Solar thermal is not that much of attractive because it's of the the requirement being very less. Biogas also is slightly tricky, because biogas becomes viable only if you have a starchy waste or a plate waste. If you have a green leafy waste, like, even if you are cutting the vegetables and all that, that doesn't generate much of a biogas. So that is something which is not recommended for a biogas plant. But the starchy waste, the rotis or maybe waste atta or bread, so those kind of thing, if it is there for a bigger colleges, you have substantial quantity of that waste, which should not be there, considering that we are always trying to avoid food waste. But in case it is there for whatever reasons, then biogas becomes feasible. Otherwise, biogas is not recommended here. Now, this is also basically for a huge, big campuses. We do not have it for regular colleges. And now you have dry leaves, big number of plants are there. You have dry leaves or any other kind of agro waste. Then you can make it. There are pelleting machines available with which pellets can be made. Small pellets, maybe about 4 mm dia, 500 mm dia, and those pellets can be used for cooking application. There are smokeless chullas available based on pellets or wood chips, which will have a good efficiency. And this being a renewable energy, it will also qualify under that category. Then you can also make charcoal from these dry leaves. There is a process through which you can do that, because it has good amount of carbon. So charcoal also can be done. And if this agro waste is really huge, power plants are also available. But power plant is not something for colleges. At the most, what you can think of is small pellets, if it is feasible. This is another area which is, again, not very attractive, but this also is possible. There are micro turbines available from 1 kilowatt to 10 kilowatt, or even smaller are available, but they may not become, if there's specific applications where you need only 50 watt, 100 watt, then those turbines make sense, because then it will not have economics, because smaller the machine, the economic payback becomes more and more swan. But people have that concept, the green buildings and all. They think of having this micro turbine on the terrace, so that some power gets generated and your overall full carbon footprint is reduced. So for them, they are there 1 kilowatt to 10 kilowatt, 500 watt, 400 watt is also available. But this is a blade size, 1.5 meter to 3.5 meters is a blade size. And typical generation could be 1,000 to 15,000 depending on the capacity and wind velocities. This is also not very attractive, but this is one area where we can consider. The next is water and water conservation. The water purification, that is the first thing they say, that what is the quality of water. That's one of the areas where we need to focus. And purification will depend on type of source. If you are having a municipal water, like Mumbai, now they have declared that Mumbai tap water is safe for drinking. Although many people have their own reservation, but more or less it is quite good, and it is can be directly used for drinking. But other municipality, maybe that has some TDS is higher, maybe there's some other reason. So depending on from where the water is coming, the purification system will depend. Now, the major impurities include the microorganisms like bacteria, algae, fungi, etc., which is there, viruses, pyrogens, dissolved inorganic compound, that is what we call TDS, or dissolved salts. Then dissolved organic compound, this is basically in very small traces, but they are equally harmful. So we have to have a removal of organic compounds. Dissolved gases, Mostly it is oxygen, which is anyway good, but there can be carbon dioxide also get dissolved to some extent. There are some other gases also may be dissolved to some extent, depending on this. So even sulfurous and nitrous oxides have some solubility in gases, water. So anything can be available in traces. So that need to be regularly checked. So whatever water you are getting from the source, there has to be some kind of testing to see what are the impurity levels in the source water. And depending on the corrective measures or the remedial purification system has to be designed. Suspended particles, colloidal particles. Now, this is if you are getting from the river. Now, if it's directly coming from the river, which is very unlikely for colleges, then you need to have an elaborate system, including maybe sand filters and other things, activated carbon filters, sand filters to remove those suspended particles, colloidal particles, organic impurities, dissolved gases, organic dissolved gases. Then inorganic compound removal is very tricky. They're basically what we have is either DM plant or RO water. So if the dissolved solid TDS is very high, especially if you have a boreal water and from the very low level or very far away places from the natural river water source, then the dissolved water would be higher. Now that is not good for health if you are consuming too much of salt. So it has to be removed. Now removal is either by RO, reverse osmosis process, or with TM plant. So RO has become now RO, the costs have come down. So RO can be considered as one option if you have very high TDS water. Like most of the now, even for domestic, they are recommending or they are going for RO based system. Only problem with RO is there is a lot of wastage, because RO works on a principle of permeability. So the water permeates from the high concentration to low concentration due to application of pressure. So whatever is the permeate, that is a good quality water with a control TDS. Now we say we can maintain any TDS, maybe 50 TDS, 100 TDS in the permeate. Correspondingly, the reject, which is basically the water which will be thrown out, will have higher concentration of salts and the flow will also increase. So there is a feed water which goes to the RO. It will have two streams. One is a permeate, which will have a low TDS, good quality water, which can be used for drinking, and other will be reject, which is high because the whatever is not going in a permeate, everything has to go in reject. So reject will have high TDS, maybe virus, pyrogen, whatever it is, and it has to be thrown out. So the water effectively you may end up throwing away 30 to 40% of the water due to RO activity. That is the main disadvantage of RO. Of course, this water can be used for some applications, like you can use it for washing, you can use it for gardening, you can use it for flushing and other things. So that has to be incorporated. So if you have a RO system, you should also think of having some application for RO reject. So basically, it means that we need to have a purification system based on the kind of impurities or kind of source of water we have, and we should have a regular analysis done for the source of water, and correspondingly what remedial steps we have taken, that also need to be validated. So water testing is one activity that need to be taken regularly by the colleges. The second is the drinking water quality and arrangement. Now, normal water and drinking water, of course, you need a better quality. So maybe you have RO purification system. So what is the system for drinking water? Then the accessibility and availability of drinking water, that also is a part of the green audit initiative, that whether students have to walk a lot or maybe the water is not available at convenient locations, then that also need to be addressed. And control and checks, as I said in the earlier slide, periodically we need to check the quality control. What is the water quality of the incoming? What is the quality of the drinking water? So that water quality is maintained. Another part of low water usage is you have to go for a low usage gadgets. There are a lot of water gadgets available which consume less water. As I said, even there are low flow toilets available which will consume 30 to 40% of the normal water. And mind you, toilets and flushing is one of the major consumer of water in any common facilities. See, the I've seen some college audit reports where toilets consume almost 20% of the water, whereas urinals consume 10 to 12% of the total water. So there's a substantial consumption in this area, and this is a low-grade water requirement. Like we don't need for flushing, because where there's no human contact with the water, the quality of water can be brown. You can have a STP treated water or no treated water also used for such kind of application, and that should be done. We'll see that part also for this. So that is the aspect that we should go for a low flow toilets, urinals. So there are waterless urinals also available. They are a bit expensive. Maintenance is more, but that aspect can be seen. And as I said, for the basins and faucets, there are a lot of fittings available, and there is a continuous improvement in this area, which can reduce the water consumption. There are nozzles, mist nozzles, which can, as I said, which need only 2% of the regular water supply. Of course, they're expensive. We don't expect that to be in college, but you should know the technology. If you have a plantation, you can consider going for a drip irrigation or such kind of system, which will have very less water requirement. So similar to energy, here again we can have automation and control. Similar line, exactly no different. Metering and monitoring. What are the major consumers and whether the consumption is as per the norms or not? Because I have seen many of the colleges do not have even the consumption details available. Often the bill comes, it is paid, but there's nobody who will look after this and how much we are consuming, what is the consumption per person, what is the consumption per person, either student or staff or total, that kind of thing. This again can be benchmarking. We can compare your consumption against other colleges. And mind you, there has been wherever we are seeing energy part, at least most of the colleges are on a similar line, but water consumption, there is a huge variation. There are colleges consuming 3 liter of water per day per person. There are colleges consuming 20 liter of water per day per person. Similar kind of arena, not hostel and all. It's only a college, but this is the level of variation, where you have 3 and 20. 6 times, 7 times consumption. So this is something we need to focus more. Monitoring of losses, leakages, seepages, drains, because many times if the tap is not, even if the washer is faulty, it will keep on leaking, and it's very difficult to know because it's a common activity, common facility. There's no availability, unless somebody goes and really physically checks, you don't know that there are leakages. But if there is some kind of metering where we know, okay, this is the consumption, then we know, okay, the consumption has gone up, means there is some problem. Then there can be sensor-based or timer-based actuation for gardening, flushing. That is also possible. That is something which will save on energy and water. Pumping with level controller, that I said earlier. Then there is a reuse, recycle. This we'll see in that waste also, but reuse is basically without any treatment. You can reuse that water without making any treatment. Then that is a reusing. If you treat and use it, then it is a recycle. That you are doing something. Recycle paper, recycle water. So if you send water to STP, sewage treatment plant, and after that you use it for flushing or gardening, that means it is a recycling. But if you just collect the drain water or maybe some water from the drainage or water from the cooling, you have some small application and use it for gardening or anything, then it is a reuse. You're using one water which is already use somewhere, same thing, instead of throwing, you're using for some other application. That is the difference between reuse and recycle. Then rainwater harvesting, this is not as much relevant to Mumbai as to other areas. You know, where Mumbai has 10-15 feet below is a water table, and we cannot have anything done. We should only allow it to go through the soil. Because with concreting everywhere, it has become a problem. You know, there's no way the water can seep into ground, so it is just flooding the entire area. So rainwater harvesting is only to control the flooding, not for anything else. But other areas, it will make sense. You know, so rainwater harvesting, one is you can harvest, store the water, and use it for your normal requirements throughout the year. Now, this is possible where the rains are less and the water availability is slightly difficult. Now, you might have seen Rajasthan, many of the houses, you know, there are a lot of TED shows and YouTube videos on that, that the houses have a storage beneath, and that water they are able to use almost throughout the year. There's I think somebody in Nagar also had done that kind of thing. So you store it and use it throughout the year for cooking and drinking applications, because the rainwater is pure. No, it has no impurities. So you should let the first few rains water drain, because it will have some suspended particles. It may have some dissolved gases from the atmosphere. But after 2-3 rains, the terrace is also clean, the air is also clean. So subsequent rainwater can be stored in a tank, and with small purification, depending on the requirement, it can be consumed for all applications, including drinking. But it is investment oriented, because you have to have a storage tank and small purification system. So it makes sense only when water is scarce. If water is not that scarce, it doesn't make that big sense. The next is a groundwater recharge. You know, you can have recharge pits. There's a scientifically provided method, and Bangalore, a lot of people are doing it. You know, on a community basis, social basis, otherwise commercial basis also. That the water is basically fed to the ground to recharge and replenish the water level, so that same water can subsequently be used by us and by anyone, you know, because that once it goes inside ground, it improves the water table. It is not going to remain our property, but it's good. We can use it, everybody else can use it, and if everyone does it, then there will be sufficient water for each of them. So there are recharge pits designs available. We can do that. Or if there is any old bore well, you can directly feed to that bore well. It will get to the ground. It will get recharged. Then if you have a big campus, you can think of having tanks and ponds, small ponds and tanks. So it will also recharge the ground level, because the tank is also going to seep the water, and also you have some storage. It will also look very nice, you know, beautification purpose. So if the campus is big, tanks and ponds also can be thought of. Bunds are similar. Like basically, bunds are also for groundwater recharge. Bund will hold the water, and once you hold the water for longer time, it will have more and more seepages in the ground, and you will improve the water table. So here we'll see basically air quality and ventilation. There are some 4-5 parameters which are critical. Suspended particle matter, SPM. Now that is a hot topic. Now Delhi has quite a bad air quality, but suspended particle is something which is beyond our control, because it is we are not adding to it. We are only trying to see if it can be controlled. Now, depending on the type of area, we need to have some special filters to filter out SPM. So we don't have a very big control on SPM, because it is coming from other people's sin. Then temperature and humidity, this becomes critical, especially in the indoor area, when you have a classroom or when you have a air conditioned rooms, or otherwise also, like, you know, if you are having a class in a non-AC room, and if the ventilation is not good, then effectively the temperature and humidity will keep increasing. It will become very inconvenient. So that is one aspect we need to see. Now, when we do green audit, we have those instruments. Instruments are not very expensive. We have a typical instrument, maybe even 500 rupees or 1,000 rupees. Small tabletop models are available, which will show you temperature, humidity. So this can be checked. And correspondingly, the ventilation, maybe opening of the windows and other thing can be seen. The third important parameter becomes carbon dioxide. This is quite important, especially for air-conditioned area. And we have seen in many colleges, the air-conditioned area ventilation is less and carbon dioxide level is very high. See, typically the carbon dioxide level is maybe about 400 to 500 ppm in atmosphere. Up to 1000 ppm level, humans are comfortable. Now, if he goes beyond 1000, a slight uncomfortness may be felt for a longer period if you sit. So 1000 to 500, 1500 is a borderline. But if it goes above 1500, it is definitely uncomfortable. So anybody sitting in the atmosphere having more than 1500 ppm of CO2 for a longer time will feel nausea or kind of giddiness and other things. So this is something we need to see, especially for a cramped or conditioned area. If the lecture rooms have well ventilated windows across, cross ventilation is there, then this problem doesn't come. But air conditioned area, cramped, this one we have seen this problem at many places. So this is something which need to be addressed. You have to increase the ventilation, fresh air intake to ensure that CO2 is maintained below 1000 ppm. Now, VOC, normally volatile organic matter will come only from the paint or other things. So if it is freshly painted or if there is some kind of carpet, then we need to bother about VOC. And there are instruments available which will measure VOC and give you the value. But VOC is not as much of a problem for colleges as CO2 is. NOx and SOx are not there. They are there in the atmosphere. So if you are unfortunately close to any polluting area, then NOx, SOx would be higher. Otherwise, there will not be an issue. Another aspect is illumination and lighting. As I said, we are comfortable with lesser lux level, but still, it should not be as bad that people are not able to see it and they are not it becomes strenuous on the eyes for the students. So depending on the application, actually lux level should be maintained. Now you are in a classroom, maybe 200 or 250 lux is good enough and mostly with natural light. But laboratories or special task areas where the precise work is done or anything is done, the lux level should be correspondingly higher, maybe 500 or even 1000. Then corridors and passages, it should not be, it's not very critical, but it should be visible maybe about 50 to 60 lux or 100 lux. So that is one area we need to look at. Outdoor also low roads, and this outdoor is more important only if you have a campus with some activities going on across, even during the night period. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. But all these roads, pathways, corridors, you need to maintain certain lux level. Noise and sound level is another aspect we need to see. There's not big control on us, but we should consider that because now noise can be a big pollutant. If there's a continuous noise, maybe honking or maybe industry, then it becomes difficult to concentrate and can create a difficulty. This is another area we need to be concerned about, the neatness and cleanliness. As they say that a place for everything and everything in its place, that's most important. You should have everything in as a proper place, it should be there. And so things are, the condition, overall condition, then dustbins and segregation facilities should be available, cleaning frequency, there should be records. Industries, they have or even hotels, they have even, there's a record sheet even for the toilet, and every time the person comes, cleans it, checks it, he should sign. So in a day they check it 3 to 4 times. Such kind of thing, of course, not required, but some records and cleaning frequency need to be decided. So greenery and water bodies basically from the point of view of neutralizing the carbon footprint, and to some extent try to improve the water table and make it look beautiful. So you can have indoor plants, vertical gardening, terrace gardening, whatever is feasible and possible. It'll come as a plus point for the green audit. As I said, environmental policy is restriction on a vehicular movement in campus, banning harm product like plastic, thermocol, and maybe whatever is could be others also. Promoting green products and minimizing, discouraging use of paper. This is for in-campus movement. See the next, I think, green initiatives. So basically, this is one aspect we need to be seen in the green audit. That's what are the environmental promotion activities we are carrying out. There are budgetary provisions and spend for the activities, because these kind of things need a support from the top management. And if it is available, then correspondingly, it should be seen and what are the activities that has been carried out. It can be internal or in-house, you can have awareness programs, training sessions through external or internal people. Then green initiatives and activities, maybe you can go for composting with student participation, admin paper from the waste paper, waste to well activities. You can have competitions, debate, painting, poster, product, project. So such kind of thing which is basically done by the students and the faculty in the college. You can have outdoor or external. Participating in community events, they have a lot of cleaning drives programs where they say, okay, come gather together and we'll clean the lake and all that kind of thing. Then inter-college competitions, awareness programs. So this is basically what activities are done. This is specifically basically of interest to the NAC. They keep saying about that the paperless communication should be there. Minimize usage of paper for administrative, for administrative purpose. Whatever exams we need to use, but rest of things need to be monitored and use both sides of paper. And there should be some monitoring. Like this is the data we were not able to get in most of the colleges. How much is the paper consumption for non-exam work? Because exam anyway we don't have control. Like nowadays, even the question paper has to be printed by the college. So that again add to your paper consumption, but that is something which cannot be controlled by you. But apart from exam, wherever the paper consumption is there, whether there has to be a monitoring, either per person or per staff per year, what are the consumption value? Those are not available in most of the colleges, but this I think should be addressed and looked into by the colleges to ensure that overall paper consumption is reduced. Now, what are the recognitions internally and externally, like awards, whether the colleges got some, because there are many activities taking place and many functions are taking place. So whether any awards have been received by individuals or institute, that also can be seen. I'll come to waste management. So waste management, basically there are 4 R's, as I was saying in the beginning. Review is first is just review and see possibility of completely eliminating the usage. It looks out of the box, but many times it has happened. You have totally different alternative available, which will make it the total usage gets eliminated. Now, for example, waterless urines, which are becoming common. Now, electronic board. Now, if you have electronic board, your chalk, duster, or everything goes away. You don't need anything. It is only you write it on an electronic board, and then that's it. So, such kind of gadgets are available, and such kind of possibilities are there. You should always see whether that kind of particular application is really necessary, or how it can be replaced with some lesser consuming or lesser energy intensive application, so that total elimination can be possible or replacement can be possible. So when you review activity periodically, then it is possible probably to have a replacement or total elimination of that activity from the energy point of view or water point of view. I'm not saying from the activity point of view, but from the water. Like when you instead of memo, if you are writing emails, that means your paper consumption has gone to zero. So it becomes a paperless office. Similarly, when you have electronic board, the chalk, duster, other things, consumption goes down. The next is reduce. If you cannot eliminate, the next is whether the consumption can be reduced. For example, low flow water filtering. Now, this has become more relevant in industries also, where we have seen that there is a tendency of using, like a simple example is, when in a filtration process, the water consumption has been reduced by almost 70%. So 100 liter, if earlier consumption was there, it has come down to 30% through proper measures and steps. So that is another thing. And as I said, nothing is permanent. Now, when we reduce it this year, next year, there may be some additional or new technology available which can reduce it further, or maybe that will totally eliminate it. So this has to be done and analyzed on a periodic basis. So you have to do review periodically, maybe once in a year, maybe once in a 2 year. The frequency can be decided internally. But this review everything has to be done on a regular basis. It's not a one-time activity. The third R is reuse. You can reuse the thing for some other application, without much treatment. As I said, recirculating of water, drinking water, sequential washing. When you are washing something, like if you see the roadside chaiwala, he will have 2 or 3 buckets. So whatever is the dirty cup, he'll put in the first bucket, rinse it, put it in the second bucket, it will be further clean, and then put it in the third bucket. And then if he is a good one, he'll wash it with clean water and then reuse it. So with this, what happens is your total water consumption goes down, because the clean water becomes slightly dirty, it goes to the second bucket, and the dirty water finally is thrown out. So with this, the overall water consumption can be reduced. So it is kind of reusing the water for the without any actual treatment. Then the last is the recycle. That is after doing a major treatment, like you have a sewage treatment plant or any other thing, you treat it and then reuse it, for flushing, gardening. So there are 4 R's we need to always see when you're doing a waste management. So first, see how the waste is generated and whether the generation of waste can be totally eliminated. If it is not possible, how it can be reduced. Then how it can be reused so that effectively your gross level waste generation is reduced. And then finally recycle. Now, as I was saying earlier, now segregation basically is the best strategy, because if you segregate at the source, your overall on a city level or a country level or a town level load comes down drastically. Now, what we can do is now we have some water usage. Now, all the water doesn't have same level of contamination. But if you mix the water, then it will have a strange contamination level, which will become very difficult to treat. So you have something like, even for when we say solid waste, then what happens? If you segregate the waste, So organic waste can directly go for composting. Organic waste has 70% water, 70-80% water. So it can go to the composting. So that much of load is reduced on the overall waste management system. So if you segregate, but if it is mixed and then entire waste goes to the municipal sewage or municipal solid waste plant, it becomes very difficult for treatment. So reuse the less contaminated water or solids so that your total waste generation is reduced. Then segregation will also help you to devise appropriate treatment and recycle strategy, because not all the water is having same kind of contamination. It doesn't need the same kind of treatment. So correspondingly, we can decide the treatment strategy, and then this, okay, this is how it can be done. You have a specific water, one source drain is acidic, you can neutralize then and there, and then mix it with total water instead of making everything acidic and then neutralizing it. It will also reduce the load on the treatment plant, because the water quantity will come down and the contamination level will come down. This will also reduce the cost. Obviously, when the load is reduced, the cost will also come down, and overall consumption will get optimized due to recycle and reuse strategy. So overall water saving will be there, cost saving will be there, and treatment load also will be less. Of course, we need to consider economics while doing it, but this is the way forward. Similarly, for the solid waste, you have a different kind of. The most common is organic or biodegradable waste. For institute level, I think most of the people are doing it. If they are not doing it, they should do it. Go for a composting pit. You can have 2 sets of pits. One fills, then you leave it like that for some time. And even that filling will take a lot of time, because as I said, 80% is water. So within 2-3 days or 4 days, that water vanishes and the level doesn't go down. So the level doesn't rise. So if you see the biodegradable pit, filling the pit itself takes time, and then leave it like that for 45 days so that you have a compost which can be used in-house for planting, or it can be sold also. Then paper waste can be again segregated and recycled, sold separately, or you can make some handmade paper objects and all that if somebody has interest in that. Metallic can be sold separately. General waste is disposed of as per the norm. General waste is something which cannot be classified in sold separately. Hazardous is to be disposed of through designated agency, or you can have your own hazardous disposal system. Like biomedical, you can have incineration. Electronic waste, it can be reused if it is possible, or you can given it to somebody for usage, because when we buy a LCD display, our CRT is still working, so it can be given to somebody else who can use it, or dispose of through the norms. There are companies who are paying little amount for collecting the e-waste, so it should be disposed accordingly. It should not be mixed with other hazardous chemicals, radioactive waste. It is not so common for colleges. Maybe a few medical colleges are doing research in that, they may have it. Accordingly, it should be disposed of. So this is basically in-campus movement. This is mainly from the safety point of view. So whether there are sufficient entrances so that in case of emergency, there is no stampede or blockage, or there are no incidents happening. Entrances, staircases, pathways, gates, they should be designed for a mass removal of the people in a very short time. That is basically the idea. It should not have a single entrance, because if the single entrance gets blocked for some reason. Similarly for the staircases. This is general plantation. Now, this basically as a green audit, there's more stress on the public transport or a shared transport. So this is what we are saying, that now parking facilities should be available to the people who are bringing vehicle. Otherwise, there should be a public transport accessibility, closeness, or there should be a group or shared transport provided by the. It should be available. Like if it's away from the city, then there should be a common transport. Everybody should not come by its own vehicle, because that will add to the emission and add to the pollution also. So from that point of view, this is one area where is also looked at, whether we have a accessibility to the public transport, or whether there's a group transport provided. Many colleges now have that, they provide a bus facility from the campus to the main city point, from where the public transport can be accessed. And whoever are bringing vehicles, there should be a parking available for them. Then internal roads, pathways. Firefighting and extinguishers. Firefighting is basically for a larger campus, where they should have a storage tanks, pumps, jockey pumps, and automation for smoke detector, the automatic pump, sprinkler system. For buildings and all, there should be fire extinguishers provided at appropriate places and correct size. It should be depending on the location. It should be dry or water-based extinguishers. They should be refilled regularly and checked for their dates. They should be also checked for functioning. There's a method of, and there's a procedure laid down, so that randomly some extinguisher should be checked for functioning. It should not happen that we have an issue and that time the extinguisher doesn't function properly. And there should be a training program for operating those things. Like not that everybody knows how to operate the fire extinguisher. Then that is required. There should be a mock drills that suppose, like industries, they have it, there will be a siren. When there's a siren, the people should follow a particular way and get gathered at one particular place and then exit. Those are also required because there are incidences, your Vapi, Surat, there was an incident where a lot of students died because of that problem. So there need to have some drills and training programs. Then the roles and responsibility in case of emergency should be fixed, like which professor or which faculty would do what, which staff member will do what. That has to be also fixed, and matrix should be made. Safety, fire is also part of safety, but it is taken separately. There should be a safety manual for other kind of thing, SOP, standard operating procedures. If this happens, what should be done? Then roles and responsibilities, public address system to make people awareness, and mock drills. Similar to fire, it will be on the same line. Overall building conditions, upkeep, this also is a part of the green activity. Not so much relevant, but it is the maintenance practices, faults and cracks, water drainage, internal seepages, rain-related seepages. So these kind of things should not happen. So overall maintenance of the building should be good. General security, entry and exit controls, badges and ID cards for students, fencing and unauthorized access. These are also something we see. So with this, I complete the session. Any questions or doubts, we can discuss that now.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Indeed, it was a session filled with the knowledge. Now, with your kind permission, I would like to take up the question answer session.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
I request Professor Ratnam Guzar to take the question answer session now.
Good morning, sir. There are a few questions. The first question is by Professor Chetan Rane. what are the latest technologies or AI software that can predict the system losses and can save energy?
No, I didn't get you.
Are there any latest technologies or AI software that can predict the system losses and can save energy?
No, there are methods of, yeah, you can predict the system losses. There are methods of doing it, but that depends on the system, like what kind of system we are talking of. There are methods either, through AI or otherwise, which losses can be predicted, and then those systems are available.
Sir, next question is by Priyanka Deshmukh ma'am. On rainy days, will solar photovoltaic system or solar thermal solar thermal system works efficiently?
No, actually, if it is raining, they will not get anything from solar. If it is overcast, there can be some generation. It will be reduced, but it can be there. But solar thermal will not be effective even in overcast situation.
Okay, sir. Next question is by Professor Bhostekar. How we can use air quality? How we can improve air quality with the help of different types of ventilation?
Basically, we need to when we want to improve which parameter we need to, if we want to improve the particulate matter, SPM, suspended particulate matter, then we need to have filters. There are filters available of different grading which filter out the particles, so whatever fresh air we are taking, there should have a filtration, that filter should be there in that intake of the fresh air, so that filter whatever incoming air will not have particles. Now, if we want to reduce carbon dioxide, so in the closed room, the only way is to bring away fresh air, because carbon dioxide is through exhaling when you exhale the air, the carbon dioxide contents are higher. And if you don't have ventilation, the carbon dioxide level will start going up. So for that, we need to have more and more of fresh air coming in the room.